forest floor was cold under my bare feet, and somewhere behind me something was counting down. My name is Owen Vale, and 3 hours ago I was a cargo pilot with a routine delivery contract. Now I was standing in an alien forest with no shoes, no weapon, and a device strapped to my wrist that was ticking backward from 60 minutes. When it reached 0, the hunt would begin. I was not alone. Around me, spread across the tree line, stood 40 other humans, all pulled from the same transport ship under the promise of a mercenary contract. Mara Lindquist stood closest to me, her jaw tight, her eyes scanning the trees like she was already building a map in her head. Derek Holt was pacing, muttering numbers, the way engineers do when they are trying not to panic. A young woman named Ivy Sutton was crying quietly, and an older man named Callum Reyes had his hand on her shoulder, telling her to breathe. None of us understood yet what we had been brought here for. Then the voice came, smooth and amused, echoing from hidden speakers in the canopy above us. "You have been selected for the finest tradition of the Thren Dominion," it said. "A hunt of skill, honor, and challenge. You have 1 hour to disperse. After that, the preserve is yours to survive, or not." I remember the silence that followed. Then I remember Derek asking the question none of us wanted to ask out loud. Survive what? The answer came fast. Shapes moved at the tree line, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in armor built for status rather than protection. They carried weapons shaped like ceremonial blades, more for show than necessity, because to the Thren, this was never about danger to themselves. It was about entertainment. It was about proving that humans, the newest and weakest species in the galaxy, could be broken for sport. There is one law in this galaxy that every species is taught before they are taught anything else. No sapient species shall be hunted for entertainment. It is the single rule the Concord enforces without mercy, guarded by an ancient order called the Wardens, who do not negotiate and do not forgive. Every civilization respects that law, not out of kindness, but out of fear of what happens to those who break it. The Thren broke it anyway. They believed humanity was too new, too disorganized, and too insignificant to matter. They believed no one would notice 40 missing colonists on a distant preserve world. They believed we would run, and scream, and die quickly, giving them a story to tell at their gatherings for the next century. They were wrong about all of it. When the countdown reached its final 10 seconds, I did not run. I looked at Mara, and she looked at me, and something passed between us that needed no words. We had spent our lives being underestimated. This was simply the loudest version of that mistake. The moment the timer hit 0, the forest went still. Then the first shot rang out, not aimed at us, but into the air. A signal that the hunt had officially begun. The Thren wanted us scattered and afraid before the real chase started. Instead, we moved together, deeper into the trees, toward higher ground that Derek had already spotted during the countdown. By the time the first hunting party found our trail, we were no longer 40 frightened strangers. We were a plan. The Thren hunter who found us first was confident, almost lazy in his approach. He expected prey that would freeze or flee. Instead, the ground gave way beneath him. A trench Callum and 2 others had dug and covered with branches during the final minutes of the countdown. He fell hard, and before he could rise, Mara secured his weapon and his communication device, cutting him off from the others. We left him alive, disarmed and stunned, because killing was never the goal. Sending a message was. Word did not reach the other hunters quickly enough to matter. A second group arrived an hour later, moving in a loose formation that suggested they still believed this was a game with fixed rules in their favor. Derek had studied the terrain and found a narrow pass between 2 ridgelines, the only route large hunting parties could take without breaking formation. We waited there, using nothing but ropes, loose rock, and the element of surprise. When the group entered the pass, we triggered a landslide that separated them, isolating 3 hunters from the rest. Ivy, who an hour earlier had been shaking with fear, moved with the calm precision of someone who had found a reason bigger than her fear. Within minutes, the isolated hunters were disarmed and left tied to trees, confused and humiliated, their pride the only thing truly wounded. By nightfall, word had spread across the preserve. Human prey was not behaving like prey. The Thren command structure, unwilling to admit failure, sent more hunters instead of retreating. This is where their arrogance became their greatest weakness. They assumed a larger number would guarantee success, without understanding that we were no longer hiding. We were organizing. Through the night, survivors from other landing zones found their way to our camp, drawn by signal fires Mara had arranged in a pattern any trained pilot would recognize. By morning, our group had grown from 40 to nearly 70. Every person who had been dropped onto that preserve now united under a single purpose. We were not going to wait to be hunted. We were going to make the preserve too costly to hunt at all. Callum, who had spent years working in structural engineering, before joining the transport crew, proposed the plan that would define the following 2 days. Instead of scattering to survive individually, we would use the terrain itself as our greatest weapon. The preserve was full of narrow canyons, unstable cliffs, and dense tree lines, features the Thren had chosen to make the hunt exciting for themselves. Those same features became traps in human hands. We built false trails leading to dead ends. We created noise diversions using broken equipment left behind by disarmed hunters. We turned their own tracking technology against them by feeding false signals into devices we had taken. Every encounter after that first day ended the same way, not with brutality, but with humiliation. Hunters disarmed, hunters stranded, hunters forced to call for extraction because they could no longer function as hunters at all. By the 3rd day, the Thren had lost so many hunting parties to embarrassment rather than injury, that their remaining forces refused to enter the deeper preserve at all. What began as a hunt for sport had become a retreat from shame. That was when the signal reached beyond the preserve. A trading vessel, passing through the system on an unrelated route, picked up encrypted distress markers hidden inside the false tracking signals we had planted. The crew, recognizing the pattern as a call for help rather than random noise, forwarded the recording to the nearest Concord relay station. Within hours, the recording reached a listening post monitored directly by the wardens. I did not know any of this at the time. All I knew was that on the 4th day, the sky above the preserve changed color, a shift in the upper atmosphere that every species in the galaxy is taught to recognize and fear. The wardens had arrived. Their ships did not fire on the preserve. They did not need to. A single broadcast silenced every signal on the planet, addressed not to us, but to the Thren Dominion leadership orbiting above. "You have broken the one law every civilization is bound to honor," the broadcast said. "There is no explanation that will be accepted. There is no appeal that will be heard." What followed was not violence in the way the Thren had intended for us. It was consequence, swift and absolute, carried out by an order that had enforced this single law for longer than most species had existed. The Thren hunters still on the preserve were removed, not harmed beyond restraint, and taken into custody to answer for what they had done. Their leadership above the planet faced judgment far more severe, one that every species watching would understand as final. By the time the wardens reached our camp, they found something they did not expect. They found 70 humans, unharmed, organized, and already treating the disarmed hunters left tied among the trees with basic care rather than cruelty. Mara had made sure of that. She said more than once during those 4 days that we were proving a point, not becoming the thing we were fighting against. The warden commander, a towering figure whose species I did not recognize, studied our camp for a long moment before speaking directly to me, since I had been the one to step forward. "You were meant to be prey," the commander said. "Instead, you organized a defense that outperformed most trained militias. Why did you not simply run?" I remember my answer clearly, because I had thought about it every night since we landed. Running was never going to save us, I said. Understanding the ground beneath our feet was. News of what happened on that preserve spread through the Concord faster than any official report could have managed. Other species had always viewed humanity as new, unprepared, and easy to underestimate. That perception did not disappear overnight, but it changed in a way that mattered. Civilizations that had barely acknowledged human existence before suddenly wanted formal contact. Species that had quietly speculated about testing human borders reconsidered entirely. The lesson was not that humans were unbeatable. The lesson was that humans, when pushed, did not break the way the Thren had expected. I returned home months later, along with the other 69 survivors, each of us carrying a version of that story that would follow us for the rest of our lives. Mara went on to advise the Concord directly on protective measures for newly contacted species. Derek used his engineering knowledge to help redesign colony defense systems still used today. Ivy, the young woman who had been crying in those first terrifying minutes, became an advocate for survivors of similar crimes across other worlds, using her voice to make sure no other species faced what we faced in silence. Callum returned to a quiet life, though he never fully left behind the instincts that had kept dozens of us alive. As for me, I went back to flying cargo routes, though people look at me differently now when they learn who I am. Some species offer quiet apologies for how humanity was once perceived. Others simply nod with a kind of respect that was absent before that hunt ever began. The galaxy has one sacred rule that every civilization is taught to honor. The Thren believed humanity was small enough, new enough, and soft enough to ignore that rule without consequence. They were right that we were new. They were right that we were unprepared for the technology surrounding us. But they were wrong about everything else, and that mistake cost them everything they built. They had one rule to protect the rest of the galaxy from what happened to us. We never needed that rule to protect ourselves. We only needed the chance to prove it, and once given that chance, we made certain no one would ever make that mistake again.